I remember the moment my body fell, as if time had warped and stretched endlessly. A cold wind cut through the air as my back hit the railing, and everything shattered into a sound of bones cracking and painful impacts on the hardwood floor. I screamed, but the scream was muffled, stuck in my throat like a dagger that couldn't be pulled out. For a split second, I thought, this is the end for me. I lay motionless, eyes wide open, staring up at the ceiling in a daze. And then, through the heavy slits of my eyes, I saw the figure of him, my only son, standing on the stairs. He didn't run over. He didn't scream in panic like a child who had just seen his mother fall. But he stood there, silent, looking down. That gaze, cold, unfamiliar, as if I was just an object that had just fallen from his hands, broken and no longer valuable. In that moment, a thought flashed through me like a lightning bolt. He did this. He did it. I wanted to push the horrible thought away, to convince myself that it was an accident, that my foot had tripped on the carpet, that my mind was imagining it. But the image of his hand on my shoulder before I lost my balance, the very real force that had pushed me backward, was still burned into my skin. No. This was no accident. This was betrayal. The intense pain that spread through my body made me unable to move. I heard footsteps slowly descending the stairs. The wood creaked under the familiar weight. My heart was pounding, partly from fear, partly from disbelief that the son I had carried and raised for 35 years could stand in the darkness and plot my death. It came closer. I could feel its breath on my face as it leaned down. "Mom, are you okay?" Its voice was low, almost a whisper, but I could hear the hollowness in each word. It wasn't the voice of a worried child. It was the voice of someone whose plan had failed. I tried to open my mouth, to say why, but my throat was tight. Only a weak moan escaped. A sharp pain shot up my spine, spreading to my limbs. Everything was spinning. For a moment, I prayed that I would pass out, so that I wouldn't have to see the face of my own child, a face I no longer recognized. It was calling an ambulance, or so I heard it say as I pressed the phone to my ear, but its voice, urgent but unwavering, was that of an actor reading from a rehearsed script. "My mother fell from the second floor. She's seriously injured. Please come right away." Fell. No mention of me being pushed, no hint of genuine panic. I lay there, helpless, trying to stay conscious while the ambulance siren blared in the distance. Every second that passed felt like a knife piercing my heart. I had always been afraid of many things. Afraid of poverty, afraid of illness, afraid of not being able to support my child, but I never thought that I would be afraid of my own son. As the paramedics loaded me onto the stretcher, I took one last look at him. His eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw something like anger or disappointment. I wasn't sure, but I knew one thing for sure. He didn't want me to live. I wanted to scream to the world that my son had pushed me down, but the pain choked me. All I could do was grip the hospital bedsheet, trembling, as the ambulance sped away into the dark night. In my mind, fragments of memories replayed, the years of working hard to pay the rent, the meals of beans and bread because I wanted to save up to buy him new shoes, the cold nights holding him to sleep when his father left. Each memory now felt like a stab of betrayal stabbing deep into my chest. On the way to the hospital, I kept asking myself only one question: why? The sounds of the machines in the emergency room still echoed in my ears like death knells. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling were harsh, each ray cutting into my eyes, forcing me to squint. My whole body felt like a pile of broken bricks, every breath a knife cut, every movement a punishment. They injected painkillers, They told me I was lucky not to break my neck. But in my head, another voice rang out. Lucky? Lucky to survive the push of my own child? When I opened my eyes again, he was there, right next to the bed. My son. His face was faked with concern, his eyes filled with the kind of affection I had once longed for, but now I found empty. He took my hand, his hand large, heavy, but cold. Mom, I'm sorry. I don't know how you fell. I was scared to death. His voice was shaking, but not in a panic kind of way. It was in a bad play. I looked at him, wanting to laugh, but unable to. I felt like an unwilling spectator, forced to sit through a script whose ending I knew perfectly well. Every word, every expression was calculated. Even the tears that rolled down his cheeks seemed forced. For years, I had believed in those tears. But now, in this white room, I realized I was no longer his mother. I was just a breathing life insurance policy. I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, and I could only make a few hoarse sounds. Why? It tilted its head, pretending not to understand. Why what? Mom, stop talking, rest, you need to recover, don't worry too much. Its voice was as sweet as honey mixed with poison. It patted my hand, as if coaxing a child, but actually it was to make me quiet. In the days that followed, I lay motionless on the hospital bed, prey to my own child's game. He came to visit every day, bringing smiles, bringing stories about how he called the insurance company, how the doctor said Mom was lucky, how everything would be fine. But I heard the key words he repeated over and over: insurance, money, compensation. Not once did he sincerely ask if I was in pain, if I was scared, if I needed someone by my side. To him, it all came down to money. I remembered the day I signed the life insurance policy, almost 10 years ago. I thought it was a guarantee, a safety net, that if anything happened, my son wouldn't have to struggle the way I did. I thought I was protecting him, and now I realized that the very document had turned me into his prey. I had given him the perfect motive to get rid of me. A stupid signature turned motherly love into a cold-blooded contract. The third night in the hospital, after everyone had left, I lay there, staring at the ceiling, and memories flooded back. I remembered the first time I took him to kindergarten. He cried, clinging to my skirt, refusing to let go. I held him for a long time, whispering, "Mommy will always be here. I promise." I remembered the times I had to work 2 jobs, washing dishes during the day and cleaning the office at night, just to buy him a new coat in the middle of the cold winter. I remembered the time he had a high fever. I sat by his bed all night, constantly changing wet towels, praying and kissing his forehead. All of that, now, like torn old films, played back to me the bitter truth. My love was not enough to keep him by my side. The day of discharge approached. The doctor said I would need several months of physical therapy, but I could go home. I saw the glint in my son's eyes when he said, "Insurance will cover a lot of it." He couldn't hide his excitement, not even for a second. That was the moment I knew for sure that I was right. He didn't care about the pain on my back. He only cared about the money in my account. As we left the hospital, he helped me out. His hand was on my shoulder, the same hand that had pushed me down the stairs. I was shaking, but I could no longer allow myself to lie. I knew I was living next to a beast in human skin. I knew that if I didn't change, I might not live to ask why next time. On the way home, the car drove past the streets where I used to take him for walks when he was little. I looked out the window and saw the park where I used to buy him ice cream every weekend. I remembered his happy eyes as he ran around the lawn, shouting, "Mommy, look at me." My heart ached. I used to think those memories were the solid foundation of a love that would never crack. But now, I realized that foundation was being dug up by him, stroke by stroke, trying to bury me. As the car pulled up in front of my house, I took a deep breath. I knew this was no longer my home. This was a battlefield, and if I wanted to survive, I had to stop being a victim. I had to open my eyes, find a way to fight back. Otherwise, one day, that insurance policy would become my ticket to the cemetery, and my son would be standing there, not crying, but smiling. The first night I returned home from the hospital, I lay in my old bed, my back still aching, my joints groaning with every movement. Darkness enveloped the room, the only light coming from the street lamp through the window, drawing cold streaks on the mottled wall. I couldn't sleep. My body felt tied down, but my mind was reeling, flooded with memories that came rushing back like a storm. I remember that fateful day, more than 30 years ago when my husband left. He didn't say a word. He left only a note with a few curt words. "I'm sorry. I can't go on. Please take care of the baby." That's all. Not a penny. Not a promise. Not a last hug. I sat on the floor, holding my 3-year-old son in my arms, crying until my chest felt like it was being squeezed. At that moment, I swore that no matter what, I would raise my son to be a good person. I would make up for everything a father could not give him. I would sacrifice my life if necessary, and I did just that. I remember the days of working for hire, from early morning to late at night, during the day. I stood behind the supermarket cashier, a forced smile plastered on my face even when my feet were swollen from standing for so long. At night, I went to clean the office, wiping down every table, every glass, when everyone else had gone home to be with their families. I never allowed myself to rest, because every bill, every carton of milk, every pair of shoes for my children was a battle I had to win. I remember the first time I realized I had no time for myself anymore. A colleague invited me to go to the movies, but I refused, saying I was tired. In fact, I only had a few coins left in my pocket, not enough to buy a ticket, let alone pay for a babysitter. I packed up my small dreams, the simple joys of youth, and stuffed them deep into my memory drawer, locking them up. I told myself, later, when my children grow up, I will live for myself. But that later never came. One time, I had a fever so high that I couldn't stand up. I still had to get up, put some pills in my mouth, and go out to work. I was afraid of losing my job, afraid of not having enough money to pay the rent. I remember clearly that night. When I got home, my son ran out, hugged me, and whispered, "I miss you so much, Mom." My heart melted. All my fatigue turned into strength. I believe that love, that smile, was the reward for all my sacrifices. I remember his 10th birthday. I didn't have enough money to buy him the bike he wanted. I had to work extra, doing laundry for 2 weeks to save up. When I gave him the bike, his face was as bright as the sun. I cried silently, knowing that every penny I saved, every calloused finger had been exchanged for that moment. The moment I believed I was the best mother in the world. And then, the year he went to college, I sold my only remaining wedding ring, the last token of a broken marriage, to pay for his tuition. I consoled myself that the ring had no meaning anymore, that my true love lay not in a piece of metal, but in seeing my son have a bright future. I cried all night, but they were tears of hope. I believed that one day he would understand. He would know that his mother had sacrificed her whole life so that he could stand on his own 2 feet. But now, as I lie here, my body covered in wounds from its own hands. I wonder, did all those sacrifices mean anything? The shoes I didn't dare buy for myself, the dreams I didn't dare pursue, the sleepless nights I spent worrying about it, were they all worth it? When in the end I was just a number in its eyes, a number associated with the word insurance. Tonight, when I closed my eyes, I heard the wind blowing through the window. In my head echoed the laughter of my son years ago, his innocent, "Mommy," call. I wanted to believe that that child was still somewhere in me now, that somewhere in his heart there was still a bit of love for me. But then, the image of him standing on the stairs the day I fell appeared clearly again. That cold gaze had buried that child long ago, and this truth was more painful than any wound on my body. The first days back home, I lived in a state of limbo, half awake, half asleep. The physical pain was obvious, but the pain in my heart was what kept me awake. Every time I passed the stairs where I had fallen, I felt a sharp pain in my heart, as if the railing still bore the mark of betrayal. I tried to reassure myself. Maybe it was just an accident. Maybe my memory was wrong. Maybe my son still loved me. But then, every time his eyes swept over me, I shuddered. Those eyes were no longer those of a child. They were the eyes of someone calculating, weighing benefits. I started paying more attention, and the more I paid attention, the more I noticed details that I had previously ignored. One afternoon, he came home, sat down at the dining table, and calmly told a story in a half-joking, half-serious tone. You know, Mom, some people say life insurance is the best way to secure the future. Maybe I should consider it too. I smiled awkwardly, not daring to think too deeply at the time. But now, remembering that sentence, it was like a flashing knife. I remember the time he angrily slammed the table when I refused to sign the loan papers for him to invest in a shady project. His face was twisted with anger, and he shouted, "You are so selfish. All your life you have only kept a few coins. You have never thought about my future." I trembled and apologized, even though I did nothing wrong. I only wanted to protect him from failure. But in his eyes, I had become the enemy who hindered his dreams. Another time, he was drunk, sat down on a chair, and laughed dryly. "Mom is my lifeline. If one day you are no longer here, at least I won't worry." I ignored it, thinking it was just a drunken remark. But now, those words echoed in my head like a hammer. If one day you are no longer here. Was that the plan he had been hatching for a long time? I began to realize that I had been living in a gilded cage of illusion. I believed that if I loved my son enough, he would never turn his back on me. I believed that motherly love was a sacred bond that could never be broken. But in reality, that bond had been gradually eroded by ambition, by money, by calculations that I did not want to see. And now, it was broken. One night, I woke up from a nightmare. In my dream, I saw myself falling from the second floor again, this time not in the old house, but in an endless void. I fell, and above me, my son stood watching, not reaching out his hand, not calling me a word, just standing there, smiling faintly. I woke up. Sweat soaked my back, my heart pounding. I sat up, holding my head, whispering, "Enough. I can't continue to be blind." The realization did not come in a single brilliant moment. It came slowly, like water dripping down a rock, until a crack appeared. I began to see the truth. My son was no longer the child he had once been. He no longer saw me as a mother, but as an asset, a number that could be converted into money. I shudder every time I think about it. I am afraid, but at the same time, a new fire burns inside me. A part of me died in that fall, the naive part, the delusional part. But another part rises, the instinct to live, to protect myself. I started writing in my diary, writing down every detail. I wrote down the dates. I wrote down what it said. I wrote down how it felt when it looked at me with that cold gaze. I didn't know what I was going to do with those words, but I knew one thing. I couldn't continue to be blind. I had to face the truth, no matter how painful it was. One evening, when he'd gone out, I sat alone in the living room. I looked around the house, the family photo on the wall, the old sofa, the worn carpet, all as silent witnesses to a tragedy. I whispered, "Son, if you have made me your enemy, I will not sit idly by while you destroy me. I have sacrificed my whole life for you. But from now on, I will sacrifice one last time, for myself." And right then, I knew the road ahead would not be easy. But for the first time in years, I felt something akin to strength. After that night of awakening, I knew I couldn't continue living like before, just closing my eyes and believing that everything would be okay. No, everything would never be okay if I kept leaving my fate to others. I had to do something. Even if it was just a small thing, where should I start? I asked myself that question for many days, and finally, I found the answer, starting with regaining my memory, regaining the truth, and regaining my own voice. I bought a small notebook and hid it in the drawer next to my bed. Every night, when my son was out or fast asleep, I opened it and wrote. I recorded every detail of the day, strange words, sharp looks, even fleeting feelings that I had previously overlooked. I wrote with the meticulousness of a witness, because I knew if one day the truth had to be proven, these pages would be the only evidence that I was not crazy, not dreaming, not delusional. At first, my hand trembled as I wrote, partly because the wound had not yet healed, partly because I was afraid. I was afraid that he would find out, afraid that he would be angry, afraid that he would do something even worse. But then, when the words appeared, I felt liberated. Black and white paper could not lie. Each page was a piece of truth sewn from my wounds. One day, while I was sitting in my room taking notes, I heard his footsteps in the hallway. I was startled, my heart pounding, and I quickly stuffed the notebook under my pillow. He walked in, holding a stack of papers in his hand, and threw them on the table. "Mom, sign them. These are some new insurance papers so I can take better care of you." I looked at him, my eyes trying to stay calm, but my heart was shaking. New insurance papers? Why take care of me by forcing me to sign more? I pretended to be weak, saying I was tired and couldn't read. He frowned and said in a harsh voice, "Don't you believe me? I'm your son. Are you making things difficult for me?" That sentence sent a chill down my spine. In the past, I had seen him angry and irritable, but I had never seen such obvious aggression. I shook my head slightly and said I would sign it tomorrow. He glared at me, then shrugged and walked away. I breathed a sigh of relief, but my heart was in turmoil. This was a clear sign. He wasn't just being reckless. He had a clear plan. From that day on, I started to pay more attention. I saw him often rummaging through my papers, opening drawers, looking through cabinets. Once I caught him, he just smiled falsely. "Mom is old. Let me manage it easier." I smiled faintly. But in my mind, I only thought, management or appropriation? I also realized that he controlled me in subtle ways. My phone. He often borrowed it with the excuse of resetting it for Mom to use. My computer. He knew the password and checked it many times without permission. He even kept a copy of my bank card. Before, I saw it as concern. as a son wanting to help his mother manage modern life. Now I understand. It was his way of gradually strangling my freedom. But I was no longer the blind woman I used to be. I started to change small habits. I set a new password for my phone, went to the market myself instead of asking it to, hid some cash in the rice jar in the kitchen. Small changes, but they gave me a little sense of control. Although small, it was the fire that made me believe that I still had power. One evening, while he was watching TV, I sat across from him, pretending to watch with him. On the screen, a news report was about a case of a son killing his mother for insurance money. I glanced at him. His face was still indifferent, but his eyes flashed with an indescribable light. I felt a chill. I turned away, but I told myself, I cannot let that tragedy become my life. Late at night, when the house was quiet, I sat up straight on the bed, holding the notebook in my hand. I wrote endlessly. I wrote the words I never dared to say. My child, I love you more than I love myself. But if you treat me like a commodity, I will not let you sell me so cheaply. After writing, I cried, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of a person slowly regaining strength after being crushed. I stopped thinking of myself as just a victim. I began to believe that I could become a witness, and ultimately, a survivor. And to do that, I had to keep observing, keep writing, keep the flame of awareness burning within me. I had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The pain in my back had subsided somewhat, but the pain in my heart was still dull and aching. I knew I could not continue to live like a mute in my own house. I had to face it. I had to look straight at the truth, no matter how cruel it was. That evening, he returned later than usual. The door swung open, the smell of alcohol wafting in his heavy footsteps. I was already sitting in the living room, the yellow light quietly illuminating my face, the face he had once called the strongest woman in my life. Now, all I saw in his eyes was a terrifying coldness. He threw his coat on the chair and walked over. "Mom, aren't you asleep yet?" His voice was half bored, half indifferent. I swallowed hard, trying to keep my voice calm. "Do you have something to say to me?" He frowned and stared at me. "What did you say?" I took a deep breath. My hands clasped together. About that day, about the day Mom fell from the second floor. The air seemed to freeze for a moment. His face froze for a moment, but then he immediately burst out laughing, a short, harsh laugh. "You're starting again. Mom, how many times have I told you it was an accident? You're old. Your memory is messed up. Don't blame me." I trembled, but not with fear, with anger, with pain. I remember it so clearly. Your hand on my shoulder, that push, I will never forget it. He approached, bent down, eyes narrowed, voice lowered to a hiss. "You're delusional. Mom, or do you want to show everyone that you're delusional, insane, and can't take care of yourself anymore so that they can force you into a nursing home?" The words were like a slap. He no longer pretended to care. Now he was not afraid to threaten me outright. I looked up at him, my eyes wet but determined. "If you want me to go to a nursing home, then try. But don't think I will stay quiet and let you turn me into a commodity in exchange for insurance money." For a moment, anger flashed in his eyes. He growled, "What nonsense are you talking about? I did everything just to take care of you. Do you know how miserable people are out there? If it weren't for me, would you still be alive?" I burst out laughing, a bitter, throat-stinging laugh. "Survive? Mom raised you, did everything to give you this life. Without Mom, how would you study, live, and have today. And now, you use Mom's life to take care of your future? Is that how you repay me? It was silent for a few seconds, then turned away, exhaled, and its voice became cold. You can think whatever you want, Mom, but you're old. Sooner or later, you'll need someone to decide for you, and I'm that person. You have no other choice. I looked at his back. My heart ached. The boy I once held in my arms, once called my whole world, was now speaking to me like a stranger, like a property manager deciding the fate of his possessions. I understood that the boundary had been erased. From now on, between him and me was no longer mother and son, but the hunted and the predator. That night, after it left for its room, I sat alone in the dark. Tears streamed down my face, but I no longer felt weak. I saw one thing clearly. If I did not fight back, the next time might be real death. I had sacrificed my whole life for it, but sacrificing any more would only make me easy prey for its greed. No, I would not allow that to happen. I looked at the notebook hidden under my pillow and thought to myself, the war has begun. And this time, Mom will not lose. After the argument that night, the house was silent but tense to the point of suffocation. I limped down the hallway, hearing every creaking sound under my feet as if echoing the cry of my own heart. I knew that if I continued to remain silent, I would disappear, not because of old age, but because of a premeditated plan from the son I had given birth to. The thought gave me goosebumps. I couldn't let it happen. But I also knew, how could I, alone, weak and wounded, fight against someone who was both young and cunning? I needed an ally. The next day, I forced myself to step outside for the first time since returning from the hospital. The harsh sunlight stung my eyes, but it felt easier than staying in the dark house. I leaned on my cane and walked slowly out into the garden, then to Mrs. Henderson's house, my neighbor of more than 20 years. She opened the door, surprised to see me. "Oh my God, look at you! I heard from your son that you fell, but oh my God, I didn't expect you to be this weak." I forced a smile, my cheeks shaking. I had intended to hide it, but when I saw the genuine concern in her eyes, the words I had been holding back suddenly burst forth like a flood. I told her, not everything. I couldn't say right away that my son had pushed me, but I told her about the fear, the cold eyes, the insurance papers, the suffocating control. Mrs. Henderson took my hand and squeezed it. "Sister, I can't believe it, but I've seen him look at you many times without looking like a son. I think you need to get professional help." "Professional?" I hesitated. "Yes, I know a lawyer who specializes in elder protection. If you want, I can introduce you. You can't go it alone." My heart sank. I had grown accustomed to being alone, to carrying everything, to believing I had to endure it all myself. The thought of getting a lawyer made me tremble and feel relieved. Maybe, for the first time in decades, I could let someone stand by me. The next day, I made an appointment to see the lawyer, Mrs. Collins, a slim woman in her 50s with a sharp, warm gaze. Sitting in an office filled with law books, I felt both scared and hopeful. Mrs. Collins listened to every word I said, not interrupting, just nodding and taking notes. When I mentioned the insurance papers my son had forced me to sign, her eyes darkened. "Do you have any copies?" I shook my head, ashamed. It kept everything. I didn't dare touch it, but I kept a diary, writing down everything it said, everything I saw. Mrs. Collins looked at me intently, then nodded. "Very well. That diary could be important evidence. You need to keep writing, in as much detail as possible. And from now on, whenever you see anything suspicious, call me immediately. You are not alone anymore." The words caught in my throat. She was no longer alone. I heard them echo in my heart, like a song I had long forgotten. On the way home, I felt lighter. Even though my legs still hurt and the sky was still dark, I held my stick tightly, telling myself, this is just the beginning, but at least I don't have to face it alone anymore. In the evening, my son came home and saw me writing in my notebook. He frowned. "What nonsense are you writing again? Do you want people to read it and laugh at you?" I looked up, my eyes unusually calm. "This is my mother's business. It has nothing to do with me." It glared at me as if it wanted to say something, but then just snorted coldly and walked away. I smiled faintly. For the first time, I felt like I was no longer completely passive in front of it. I had a secret, a place to confide the truth, and now I had an ally. That night, as I lay in bed, I listened to the sighing wind outside my window. A new feeling arose in me, not of safety, but of a glimmer of hope. It was a small fire, but it was so warm that it made me cry. For the first time in years, I no longer felt completely alone in the world. One gloomy afternoon when my son was out, I crept down to the basement where he kept his boxes of papers. The basement was cold, the light was dim, and the smell of dampness mixed with the smell of old paper. I trembled, my hands gripping the railing to keep my balance. I didn't know what I was looking for specifically, only that if I wanted to protect myself, I had to face the truth, see with my own eyes what he was hiding. In a file box, I found a thick file. My heart pounded as I recognized the familiar logo, Insurance Company. I sat down on the old wooden chair, trembling as I turned the pages, and then I froze. There, clearly, was my signature, or at least a forgery of my signature. I remember very well. I never signed this contract. The insurance amount stated in it was twice as high as the original contract. The only beneficiary, my son's name. Bold, clearly on the paper. My throat tightened. My fingers trembled as I typed each letter. It felt like the world was spinning. So, it wasn't just about controlling me. It had planned it all along. Step by step, it had forged my signature. It wanted to make sure that if I died, it would be the only one who would benefit. I dropped the file, tears streaming down my face. I wasn't crying because of the pain, but because the truth had been laid bare. Every memory of the days I held him in my arms, every sacrifice, every promise I whispered to myself that my son would be the reason I lived, all of it turned into a knife stabbing straight into my heart. I screamed silently, "Why, son? Why did you turn my love into this cold-blooded contract?" But along with the tears, a fire burned inside me. For the first time, I didn't see myself as just a victim. I saw myself as a witness to a crime, and I knew I had to act. I stuffed the file into a plastic bag, tucked it under my coat, and quietly carried it to Mrs. Henderson's house. When she opened the door, I almost collapsed, holding out the trembling paper. "I found this. Take a look." Mrs. Henderson took it, put on her glasses, and turned the pages. Her face changed color. "Oh, God, this is a crime, not a family matter. We must get it to Mrs. Collins at once." That afternoon, we sat in Attorney Collins's office. I placed the file in front of her. Her sharp eyes scanned the words. When she reached the signature, she looked up and looked straight at me. "This is not a genuine signature. Do you have any proof that you never signed it?" "I have the original contract in the drawer in my room. I've kept it for years." I replied, my voice trembling but firm. She nodded, her eyes shining. Great. That way we can compare and prove this is a fake. This is a serious crime. If necessary, I can ask the authorities to get involved. Hearing that, my heart pounded. I was scared, afraid that my son would find out, afraid that he would get mad, afraid that he would do something stupid. But then, I took a deep breath, looked Mrs. Collins straight in the eye, and said in the most determined voice I could muster, I'm ready. I can't let him victimize me anymore. Mrs. Henderson sat next to me and squeezed my hand. You are not alone. We are here. That night, when I got home, I looked into the mirror. The pale face of a frightened mother was no longer there. I saw my eyes shining with new determination. I knew the road ahead would be dangerous, full of struggles. But at least I had the truth in my hands, and the truth is the most powerful weapon. I closed the diary after writing a few more lines. Today, I found the proof. Today, I decided not to be silent. Whatever the outcome, I will fight. Because I live not only for the past, but for my own dignity. And for the first time in months, I slept soundly, without nightmares. Not long after I brought the file to Mrs. Collins, my son began to change. He no longer pretended to care as much as before, no longer pretended to cook porridge or asked about my health. Instead, he became wary, probing. Every time I left the house, his eyes followed me like a shadow. He asked where I was going, who I was meeting, what I was doing. Every question was wrapped in the guise of worrying about you, but I could clearly smell the control, the threat. One evening, he walked into the living room while I was writing in my diary. He snatched the notebook from my hand. My heart sank. I rushed forward, trying to grab it back, but the pain in my back made me stagger. He flipped through a few pages, his eyes narrowing at the words. On the 12th of... He forced me to sign the paper. On the 18th of... His eyes were strange. Her face turned red. She closed the book and slammed it on the table. What are you going to do with this? Are you going to make me out to be a murderer in the eyes of the world? You're crazy. I stood up straight, trembling but determined. No, Mom is not crazy. I am only recording the truth. And if you are afraid of the truth, it means you are guilty. For the first time, I saw a flicker of confusion in her eyes, but then she smiled coldly, a smile that made my blood run cold. If you continue like this, you will destroy yourself. People will think you are confused, paranoid, and when you do, you will lose everything, your home, your money, your freedom. Do you want that? I swallowed and kept silent. Seeing this, he smiled even more triumphantly. I understood. He was preparing a new move. And I was right. A week later, she brought home a strange man, neatly dressed, holding a briefcase. This is my lawyer, Mr. Grant. He will help you organize all the documents and finances. You are old. You need someone to take care of you. Otherwise, if one day you do something wrong, who will be responsible? I looked at the man. His eyes were cold, his voice soft but calculating. Madam, we just want to make sure you are protected. Your son is really worried about you. Perhaps you should consider giving him full authority to manage your assets and documents. That way, you will feel much more secure. I felt my heart drop to the bottom. So this was the plan. To make me an incapacitated person so that he could have complete control over everything. If I signed the power of attorney, I would have nothing left in my life, no freedom, no voice, no dignity. I took a deep breath and looked straight at the lawyer. Thank you, but I don't need anyone to manage me. I'm sober enough to know what I want. My son glared at me. "You are stubborn. You don't understand. You will hurt yourself," I replied, my voice trembling but firm. "If anyone is harming you, it is me." The air was thick, as if there was no oxygen in the room. The lawyer quietly packed up his papers, spoke softly to my son, and left. When the door closed, he turned to me, his face dark. "You will regret it, Mom. If you don't let me take care of it, I will force you to... Don't blame me for being cruel." I didn't answer. I just turned around and walked back to my room, my heart heavy. But in the silence, I knew I had crossed a line. It had begun to fight back, using the law to bind me, and I had to prepare for a longer, more fierce battle. That night, I called Mrs. Collins. My voice was shaking. He sent a lawyer to the house. They want me to sign a power of attorney. "You absolutely must not sign anything," Mrs. Collins replied firmly. "If they come again, call me. We will prepare the documents to prove your sanity. Don't worry, you are not alone." I buried my head in the phone, tears falling. But this time, the tears weren't just from fear. There was also gratitude and a little relief. I was no longer fighting alone, and if my son thought he could corner me, he was wrong. In my diary that night, I wrote, "My son has struck, but I will not fall again. I fell once, and I survived. This time, I will stand firm, even if I have to face the law, the justice. I will fight to the end." After my son brought a lawyer to our house, I knew this fight would go beyond the arguments within the four walls. He had brought it all into the light of the law, but in a way that was beneficial to him. If I didn't prepare, I would one day be labeled insane, stripped of my freedom, confined to a strange nursing home. The thought chilled me to the bone, but instead of despairing, I felt I needed something bigger, a larger circle of arms, a community that could support me. It was Ms. Collins who suggested it. "Have you heard of the group Senior Shield?" she asked at one meeting. "It's a nonprofit organization that advocates for the rights of seniors. There, you'll meet people like you, people who have been abused and exploited by their own children. They'll understand you, and more importantly, they'll help you feel less alone." At first, I hesitated. My proud self whispered that it was beneath me to share my pain in front of strangers. But then I remembered my son's cold gaze, the forged file, the threatening voice of Attorney Grant. I knew that self-respect was meaningless without my freedom, so I nodded. The first meeting took place in a small community room behind the city library. I entered, my hand trembling as I held my cane. There were about 15 people in the dimly lit room, all ages from 50 to 70. They sat in a circle, chatting quietly. When I appeared, a thin, gray-haired woman immediately approached and took my hand. "Hi, I'm Martha. Don't worry. No one here is judging. We've all been betrayed." That sentence made me choke up. Just the word all, and I felt like I was no longer standing alone on a lonely island. The meeting began. Each person took turns sharing their stories. An old man told of his daughter stealing his entire pension. A widow shed tears as she told of her son signing a bank loan in her name. I listened, each word like a mirror reflecting my own life. Painful, but also comforting, it turned out. I was not the only one betrayed by the person I loved the most. When it was my turn, my heart was pounding. I opened my mouth and recounted the fall from the second floor, my son's icy gaze, the falsified insurance records. My voice trembled, but I didn't stop. When I finished, the room was silent for a few seconds, then filled with nods. I understand. I was there too. I burst into tears, not because I was ashamed, but because for the first time, someone actually believed me without doubt, without thinking I was delusional. After the meeting, Martha hugged me tightly. "You are very strong, but remember, being strong does not mean fighting alone. You have us." Those words were like a buoy in the ocean. I felt a new strength within me, not only strength from within, but also from other hands reaching out. I started attending regularly. We met weekly, shared information, and exchanged ideas. One group member had won a lawsuit against his son for financial abuse. He gave me a list of reputable lawyers and agencies that could intervene. Another told me how they hid evidence safely, how to contact the police in an emergency. I took notes, like a student studying survival, and then, one evening, when I got home from a group meeting, I sat down, opened my journal, and wrote, "You have a lawyer. You have a plan, but I am not alone. I have allies. I have people who have stood in my place. Mrs. Collins, Mrs. Henderson. You think I am weak, but you do not know that I am becoming part of something bigger. Once the truth is revealed, you will have no place to hide." I closed the book and looked around the silent house. It still thought I was an easy prey. Little did it know that behind me was a silent army of people who shared the same wounds and anger, and in that anger, I found strength. That night, I slept a long sleep. In my dream, I saw myself standing on the edge of a cliff, but this time, there were many hands behind me to help me fall, and I knew, when the time comes, I will not fall alone. There were nights when the house was quiet. I sat in the living room, the yellow light flickering on the floor like a faded curtain of the past. I opened old albums, photos that had faded over the years, and I saw my son again, not the cold, greedy man I was facing now, but the boy who once smiled brightly in my arms. The first photo, he was only 3 years old, sitting in a small plastic bathtub, his hair covered in soap bubbles. His chubby face was bright. His sparkling eyes looked at me as if I was the only one in the world. I remember clearly that day. I had just returned from the night shift, exhausted. But when he smiled, all the exhaustion disappeared. I felt strong enough to fight the universe, as long as I could protect that smile. Another picture. He was 5 years old, standing on the field, wearing a baggy baseball uniform. I sat in the stands, screaming my lungs out every time he took a step. After the game, he ran up to me, hugged me tightly, panting but happy. "Mommy, I won. Win or lose. He's always been a source of pride for me." Then came the picture of him in his high school gown. I stood in the crowd, my hands shaking as I held the camera, tears streaming down my face. I remember thinking, all those years of hard work were worth it. He's grown up. He's going to have a future that I never had. Those memories pierced me like daggers. Not because they were ugly, but because they were so beautiful that it was cruel. Because when I compared them to the present, I realized that the child who used to cling to my skirt and cry, who used to whisper, "Don't go to work. Mom, stay home with me," was gone. Instead, there was a strange man with cold eyes and hands that pushed his mother down from the second floor. I had blindly comforted myself that somewhere in its heart, there was still that child. That greed was just a shell. That maternal love would pull it back. But the more I looked into the truth, the more I saw that the child had died long ago. Maybe it died the day I gave too much, and then nurtured in it the idea that everything was obvious. Maybe it died the day I put myself aside, lived only to sacrifice, made it believe that its mother only existed to serve. The pain was worse than the fall. The physical wound could heal, but losing a child in my spirit, That was a wound that would never heal. I felt like I was living next to a ghost, the ghost of my son that I had buried in my memory, while in real life, I had to face a stranger with a familiar face. That night, I burst into tears. I let the tears flow like a broken river, unable to hold them back any longer. I cried for the years of hard work, for the unfulfilled dreams, for the unconditional love that had now become a noose around my neck. I cried for the child I once was, and for the foolish mother who believed that love was enough to keep her. But amidst the tears, a thought crept in. Maybe this pain will save me, because while I still cling to illusions, I am still weak. Only when I accept that the child is gone can I decisively confront the man standing before me now. I have nothing left to lose, except my life and my dignity, and I will not let them fall into his hands. I closed the album and put it on the shelf. My hands were shaking, but my heart was beating faster than ever. I looked around the room and whispered, "Son, if I fought to protect you in the past, I will fight to protect myself now, and this time I will not lose." In the silence, I felt a strange strength rise. The pain was no longer just a burden. It became fuel for a fire no one could put out. After many sleepless nights, I knew it was time to stop keeping a diary and quietly observing. If I stood still, my son would continue to devise more sophisticated schemes to tie me down. I needed to act, not in the dark this time, but openly, by law. I called Mrs. Collins, my voice trembling but firm. "It's time. I want to sue. I want the truth to come out." That day, I sat in Mrs. Collins's office, the wooden desk covered with papers. She placed a list of things in front of me: original insurance policies, hospital records, diary entries, neighbor testimonies. I looked at the pile of papers, feeling like I was facing a mountain. But Mrs. Collins put her hand on my shoulder, her gaze steady. "Don't worry. We'll climb step by step. Most importantly, you dared to step onto this path. Not everyone has the courage to go against their own blood." I swallowed my tears and nodded. I had made up my mind. There was no turning back. In the days that followed, I threw myself into preparation. I rummaged through an old drawer and found the original contract I had signed 10 years earlier. The familiar handwriting, my real signature, shaky but genuine, lay there like a faithful witness. I placed it next to the forged contract I had found in the basement. The difference was obvious. I contacted the hospital where I was treated after the fall. The record said patient reported falling down the stairs. But I remember very clearly that day, I managed to whisper, "He pushed me." The nurse at the time leaned close to my ear, but seemed to have missed it, or deliberately not recorded it. I was angry, but Mrs. Collins reassured me. "It's okay. We have other options. The important thing is to prove his motive." The proof of motive was the insurance papers, and more than that, the words I had heard over the past months. I went to Mrs. Henderson. She did not hesitate. "I will be a witness. I heard him alluding to the insurance money many times. I will tell you everything in court." I was moved to tears, holding her hand. "Thank you. Without you, I wouldn't have had the strength." While Mrs. Collins and I were preparing, my son began to take action. He spread rumors in the neighborhood that I was losing my mind, that I was delusional, that old age was making me lose my memory. Some neighbors began to look at me with pity. I heard them whisper, "Poor woman, she's old." I was so angry I couldn't breathe, but I kept quiet. I knew the truth had to be told at the right time. One time, when I went to the market and met an acquaintance, they forced a smile. "I heard that you have a bad memory these days." I bit my lip. looked straight into their eyes, and answered clearly, "My memory is still good. I remember every detail of what my son did. It's just that I haven't finished telling you yet." They were stunned and fell silent. I turned away and walked straight, even though my legs still hurt. A mixture of anger and pride flared up in me. My son thought he could humiliate me with rumors, but he didn't know that I had evidence, lawyers, and people ready to stand by me. That night, I wrote in my diary, date, month. I have begun to fight back. It may say I am crazy, but I will prove that I am sane more than ever. Documents, witnesses, the truth, all will be weapons. If it wants to fight, I will not back down. As I closed the book, I looked around the familiar house. This was no longer just a shelter. It had become a battlefield. But for the first time, I did not feel weak. I could feel it clearly. Every step, every breath I took was bringing me closer to the day of judgment. And in my heart, I vowed, "Son, this time I will not fall. I will stand tall, and I will bring the truth to light, no matter how hard you try to hide it." I knew this day would come. Ever since I started collecting evidence, I had been living in constant fear that if I made any mistake, my son would find out. And that night, that nightmare came true. I woke in the middle of the night to a clattering noise from the office. My heart sank. I crept into the hallway, walking slowly, trying to suppress the pain in my back. The door was ajar, yellow light streaming through the crack. I peeked in, and there he was, hunched over the wooden cabinet, his hands rummaging through papers. Files, folders, invoices were strewn across the floor. My blood ran cold. I knew what it was looking for, the original contract, or the diary. It wanted to erase all traces, leave me with nothing but feeble words. I pushed the door open and walked in. "What are you doing here?" My voice was hoarse but firm. He jumped and turned around, his face distorted for a moment. Then he immediately calmed down and smiled faintly. "You scared me. I was just looking for some papers." "Looking for papers? In the middle of the night?" I took a step forward, my eyes fixed. "Stop lying. I know what you're looking for." He clenched his fists, veins popping out on his forehead. "Do you think I'm a thief? You're the one who gave birth to me, and now you dare to accuse me like this?" I smiled bitterly. "Just because I gave birth to you doesn't mean I'm blind enough to let you bury me alive with fake papers. I found that insurance policy, and my lawyer has seen it too. Do you have anything else to deny?" For a moment, his face paled. Then he laughed, a dry, chilling laugh. "Your lawyer? That's ridiculous. Yet you think those silly papers will save you? Who will they believe? A delusional old woman or a thoughtful son?" I took another step, the pain in my leg fading. "They'll believe the truth, and the truth is, you tried to kill me with that push. You wanted the insurance money, you forged the signature, and now you want to wipe away the evidence." "Shut up!" he roared, then slammed his hand on the table, sending papers flying everywhere. But I didn't keep quiet. I straightened my back and looked straight at him. "Son, I have raised you with all my life, but from today on, you no longer have the right to call this place home. I no longer recognize you as my son." The air exploded in silence. It stared at me, its eyes blazing, and then growled, "You'll regret this. I swear you will." I shivered, but I didn't back down. I pointed at the door. "Get out of my mother's house, now." He stood still for a few seconds, then kicked the chair, stomped to the door, and slammed it shut. The whole house shook. I collapsed into a chair, tears streaming down my face, my hands covering my face. It broke my heart to chase it away. But at the same time, I felt something I had never felt before: relief. For years, I had nurtured a werewolf in my house, held it like a child while it sharpened its claws. Now, at least, I had the courage to chase it out. When I calmed down, I picked up the scattered papers on the floor and folded them neatly. Then I opened my diary and wrote, "Tonight, my son showed his true colors. He dared to break in and try to destroy the evidence. I kicked him out of the house. My heart aches, but I know there is no turning back. This is war, and I have chosen to stand up. I will not fall again." The pen is trembling, but in my heart, a fire burns brightly. I know that after tonight, it will strike back even more fiercely. But I also know I am no longer afraid. I have seen the darkness in it with my own eyes, and I dare to say, enough. Outside, the wind whistled through the cracks in the door, bringing with it a chill. But inside, for the first time in months, I felt warm. Warm because I knew I was starting to reclaim my life from the one who had tried to take it away. The day of the trial finally arrived. I was wearing my old gray coat, holding my cane, my mind in turmoil. The courtroom was large and cold, smelling of old wood mixed with the scent of new papers. I walked slowly in, feeling all eyes on me. Part of me was trembling, but another part of me whispered, "This is the time for you to stand up straight, not bow your head." My son sat on the other side, neat in an expensive suit, his eyes cold. Next to him was the lawyer Grant, the man I had met in my house, this time sharper, full of confidence. I caught a glimpse of him turning to smile faintly, a smile filled with triumph. In that moment, I no longer recognized the child who had hugged my leg and cried. There was only a strange man, willing to crush his mother to achieve his goal. The trial began. Attorney Grant stood up first, his voice booming, "Your Honor, we are here to prove that my client, a dutiful son, was only trying to protect his mother. But, unfortunately, she is no longer in her right mind. She imagines things that are not true, slandering her own child. We have evidence that she is often forgetful and shows signs of mental instability." Each word fell like a hammer blow. I could see some of the audience murmuring and nodding. The blood rushed to my face. I clenched my fists, my nails digging into my skin. When it was my turn, Miss Collins stood up. Her voice was steady and clear. "Your Honor, my client is not insane. On the contrary, she is the victim of a calculated conspiracy. We have the original insurance policy and the forged policy. We have witnesses from neighbors who heard the defendant discussing the insurance money. And most importantly, we have evidence that the defendant repeatedly tried to control, threaten, and even destroy evidence." I looked at Mrs. Collins. My heart filled with gratitude. Her voice was like a sword, cutting through the fog of lies. When it was my turn to testify, my heart was pounding. I leaned on my cane and stepped up to the podium, took a deep breath, and looked straight at the judge. "I am his mother," I began, my voice trembling but firm. "I raised him all my life. I worked 3 jobs at the same time. I spent my youth so he could study and have a good life. I never thought I would be standing here. But the truth is, it was my son who pushed me from the 2nd floor, then forged my signature to collect the insurance money. I know it sounds unbelievable, but I am still here, alive to tell the truth. And the truth never dies." The courtroom was dead silent. I could hear my heart beating. Then Grant stepped forward and began questioning. "Do you have any evidence that it was your son who pushed you? Were there any witnesses? Or is it just the hazy memory of a 58-year-old who had been injured?" I gripped the podium, looking straight at him. "Yes, no one saw, but I felt his hand on my back. I remember his eyes as I fell, and I have the insurance papers to prove the motive. Any sane person can see the whole picture." He sneered, about to say more, but the judge signaled for silence. Next came Mrs. Henderson's testimony. She stood up, trembling but determined. I heard him talk about the insurance money at least 3 times. He said something like, "If she died, it would be easier." I shuddered, but at the time I thought he was joking. Now I know he wasn't joking. The whispers rose, no longer one-sided as before. I turned to look at my son. His face was tense, not as confident as when he had first entered. He clenched his jaw, his eyes bulging as he looked at me. But for the first time, I was no longer afraid. I realized, in this courtroom, I was not just a betrayed mother. I was a witness, a warrior, a person standing up for the truth. When the court adjourned, I sat down, my heart still pounding. But inside, a voice rang out. Mom did it. She dared to speak out. Whatever the outcome, she would no longer be silent. The trial entered its 3rd day. The atmosphere in the courtroom was as thick as a storm about to strike. I sat on the bench, my hand clutching my baton, my heart pounding. Everything would be decided today. Grant, the son's lawyer, stood up to begin. His voice was loud. Each word was like a knife. "Your Honor, my client has suffered too long. Not only was he slandered by his mother, but his reputation was also tarnished. We have a psychiatric examination report from a specialist confirming that she showed signs of delusions, loss of memory control after the fall." I felt like I had been punched in the chest. I turned to look at Collins, but she just put her hands on the table and calmly whispered, "Don't worry, we're prepared." Grant continued, "Think about it. A mother, no witnesses, no cameras, just an emotional account. Is it worth ruining a devoted son's life over these allegations?" There was a murmur in the auditorium. I saw my son's eyes, the burning eyes of someone who thought he was about to win. Collins then stood up. She didn't need to raise her voice, but each word was like an arrow. "Your Honor, we have evidence that the psychiatric examination the defendant presented was bribed. That expert is under investigation for at least 3 cases of falsifying records for wealthy clients. Here are the documents from the Medical Association. Please review them." Grant froze, his face flushing. My son frowned, sat up, and whispered to him. I saw the unsteadiness in his eyes. "In addition, we have new evidence, a recording taken from a restaurant security camera where the defendant was chatting with an acquaintance about his mother's death." Collins continued. A jolt. The projector turned on. My son's voice came through the speakers, clear as day. "If she falls again, it's over. Insurance will take care of it. I just have to be patient." The courtroom erupted. There were gasps, and a few people shook their heads in horror. I bit my lip, tears welling up in my eyes, but this time they were tears of truth. My son turned pale. "It was just a joke. It was just a joke," he shouted, but no one believed it anymore. The judge signaled for silence and banged his gavel. "Order!" Collins turned to me and nodded. It was time. I leaned on my cane and stood up, stepping forward. My voice was shaky but clear. I never wanted this day. I never wanted to take my son to court. But the truth is clear. He not only betrayed my mother, but also tried to take my life. I don't want him to go to jail or lose everything. I only want one thing: justice to be served, so that people like me, mothers, elderly people, are no longer seen as easy prey. The room fell silent. I looked at my son. His eyes were now filled with panic, confusion. I saw his lips move, not in apology, but in hatred. But it didn't matter. I had spoken. I was standing. The judge took notes and his voice boomed. "The panel will deliberate. The results will be announced at the next session." When the hammer came down, I nearly collapsed. But Mrs. Henderson caught me and whispered, "You did it. You stood up for yourself." A vast void opened up in my heart. I knew the battle was not over, but I also knew that the scales had turned. I was no longer the lonely woman labeled paranoid. I was the one who dared to bring the truth to light, even if the villain was my own flesh and blood. That night, when I got home, I wrote in my diary, "Today, I said everything. My son may hate me. The whole world may gossip, but I am no longer silent. I choose the truth, and in that truth, I find myself again." I closed the book and placed it on my chest. Tears fell. But this time, they were no longer tears of despair. They were tears of a soul just freed from chains. The day of the verdict. The weather was cold. The wind blew through the courthouse steps. I leaned on my cane and walked slowly inside. The long hallway, the high ceiling, everything echoed with the sound of the cane tapping like a drum, signaling a new life was about to begin. I sat down on the chair, my hands cold, my heart pounding. My son sat across from me. He bowed his head, his face haggard from sleepless nights. His neat suit now looked out of place, a shiny shell covering a rotting soul. I looked at him, and for the first time, I didn't feel angry. I saw only an abyss. The judge entered. The gavel rang loudly. "Order." His voice was clear and decisive. After reviewing all the evidence, the original contract and the forged contract, the recording and the witness statements, the jury declares the defendant is guilty of forgery and conspiracy to misappropriate property. The defendant will be held responsible before the law according to the regulations. At the same time, the right to manage the property and make legal decisions of the plaintiff, Ms., is affirmed and not restricted. The room exploded. I heard whispers and the sound of chairs and tables being moved. I sat there, my eyes filled with tears and my heart pounding like a drum. Finally, justice had called my name. My son jumped up and shouted, "No, you are old. You don't know anything. This is a conspiracy. You are all against me." The police came and held him by the shoulders. I watched him struggle, beads of sweat rolling down his forehead. I remembered the boy who had clung to my leg, crying because he was afraid of the dark. I wondered, when had that boy disappeared? I bowed my head and sighed. I wasn't happy or gloating. I only felt a deep sadness, but also a sense of peace. I knew my motherly love had been buried long ago, but today, at least, I had regained the truth for myself, for those like me. Mrs. Henderson squeezed my hand and whispered, "You have won, not only in the court, but in yourself." Collins smiled, her eyes shining. "You have proven to everyone we are never too weak to seek justice." I nodded, tears rolling down. That evening, when I returned home, I opened the door and stepped into the familiar room. Everything was there, the family photo, the album, the old chair. But the house suddenly felt different. It was no longer a battlefield, no longer filled with fear. It was home again, not because of anyone else, but because I had reclaimed the right to live in my own home. I sat down at the table and opened the diary again. My hands were shaking, but each word was clear. Today, the court has recognized the truth. My son has paid for what he did. I am not happy, but I feel at peace. For many years, I thought love could be bought with sacrifice, with money, with unconditional care. But today I understand. True love never needs to be bought, and no one has the right to take it for barter. What my mother regained was not money, nor was it victory over others. What she regained was freedom, dignity, and self-confidence. and that was the greatest victory. I closed the notebook, put my hand on my chest, and let out a long breath. Outside the window, the sunset was falling, dyeing the sky a brilliant orange. I looked in that direction, my heart filled with a new feeling, peace. For the first time in years, I felt truly free. When it was all over, when the trials were behind us, when the house returned to its usual silence, I sat alone in the living room, watching the light coming through the window, and I asked myself, what has this journey taught me? I experienced the pain that perhaps any mother would never want to touch, betrayal by her own flesh and blood. I fell from the second floor, not only physically, but also mentally. I fell in despair, in the feeling of abandonment, in the confusion that the love I had poured out was just an illusion. But then, from that fall, I got up. I got up not because I was naturally strong. In fact, I was just an ordinary woman, tired and wounded. I got up because I had to, because if I didn't, I would die in silence. And then, step by step, I learned the greatest strength does not come from others, but from my own choices. I chose truth over silence. I chose dignity over dependence. I chose freedom over fear. The biggest lesson I want to share is true love never needs to be bought with money, unconditional sacrifice or resignation. True love must come with respect. If one day you realize that love has become a chain, be brave enough to break the chain. Even if the one who binds you is your own blood, I know. Maybe out there, someone is listening to this story and crying because you too are being abused, taken advantage of, or disrespected. I want to tell you one thing. From the bottom of my heart, you are not alone. I too thought I was alone until I spoke up, until I found companions, from neighbors, lawyers, to strangers in the group Senior Shield. If you dare to speak up, you will see that the world still has hands ready to hold you. I also learned that forgiveness and letting go are not weaknesses. I no longer hate my son. I cannot turn back time and make him the boy he once was. But I can choose not to let hatred consume the rest of my life. I forgive, not to make him feel better, but to set me free today. As I recount all this, I do not consider myself a victim. I consider myself a proof that a woman, no matter her age, no matter how beaten down, can still stand up, can still find her voice, can still walk the path to freedom. And here, I would like to express my most sincere thanks to you, the one who listened to my story. Thank you for taking the time, giving your heart to accompany me through each chapter, each tear, each breath. Without you listening, my voice would just be an echo in an empty room. But thanks to you, this story becomes a bridge connecting souls. I hope that as you close these lines, you take one thing with you. Love yourself first. Don't let anyone, no matter who, define your worth. Your worth cannot be bought. It cannot be traded. It is something you were born with, and you have the right to protect it to the end. If this story touches you, if you see a part of yourself or someone you know in it, please continue to follow, share, support. Not only to spread my story, but to let many others, those who are living in silence, in fear, know that they are not alone. Every listen, every word of encouragement, every support from you is the source of strength for other stories to be told, for many hearts to be saved. I end this journey with a smile, not a smile of victory, but a smile of peace, because finally, I have found the most precious thing, freedom of the soul. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.